Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the English expression shelf life. The shelf life of something means the period of time for which it is either suitable or is popular. For example, if I look in my cupboard in the kitchen, there's pasta there. The shelf life of dried pasta might be a long time, I don't know. There's also the shelf life of a particular actor or politician. The length of time can vary depending on the product or the person, how it's used, or how long it remains popular. Shelf life is often used to refer to food. That's where the expression comes from. If something is on the shelf, how long before you need to throw it away? But we use this expression in many different ways because everything and everyone has a shelf life, especially in a country which puts a lot of emphasis on disposal. We live in a very disposable culture, which means shelf lives for everything tend to be rather short. Shelf life is the recommended maximum time for which food can be stored before it's eaten. But the meaning goes much deeper than that. The meaning, of course, can refer to absolutely anything. The concept of shelf life can apply to other products except food and drugs. So food and drugs, as I mentioned earlier, have a shelf life, okay? But if we look beyond those, okay, gasoline, petrol has a shelf life. And as I mentioned earlier, politicians have a shelf life. So let's go back to my dried pasta. We'll use some examples. We'll begin there. So my dried pasta has a shelf life of maybe 1 month or 2 months. I don't know how long you're supposed to keep it, but I'm sure I have a lot of dried pasta that's been there for a while. That's probably past its shelf life time. Now, shelf life is kind of the same as expiration date. You know, the date on food that tells you when you should throw it away. It's something the same, but maybe a shelf life can last a bit longer. Okay, so that's the pasta. Let's move away from food for a second. So, as you know, the head of our country is the royals. Okay, so we have our prime minister who looks after everything, and then we have the royals. So Queen Elizabeth had a shelf life up until the moment she died, I suppose. And people generally have shelf lives in the view of someone else. So your employer, for example, he will have a shelf life of how long you're going to be useful to the company. And that shelf life, of course, can change at any point. So whenever something changes, we often say, well, everything has a shelf life. It just means everything changes. Everything changes. Now, you shouldn't confuse this expression with the other one, which is to be shelved. When something is shelved, to be placed on the shelf, it means that it's no longer useful and you're being placed on the shelf out of the way. For example, one of my favorite chocolate bars made by Cadbury's has recently been shelved. It means they will no longer make it. One popular drink here in the UK, which is called Lilt, Lilt, it's recently been shelved by the manufacturer. So these are two different things. Shelf life is when something is something is being examined in terms of how long it will last, but to be shelved is when something is placed out of the way, when it will no longer be useful or suitable. So if you think of two different shelves, one shelf is for food that you're going to use, and the other shelf is where you put things that you no longer use. Shelf life, yes. So there we are, shelf life. I suppose at the beginning I should have told you what a shelf is. And I'm sure you know. If you open your cupboard, you have rows of wood where you can sit things. And these are called shelves. Yes, so we use the word shelf as a metaphor, the plural with the V, shelves. And there we are, yes. Speaking of shelves and these things and shelf lives, another thing which had a shelf life was that poor monkey in England 200 years ago. 200 years ago, there was a monkey which arrived on a boat from Hartlepool. Well, it arrived in Hartlepool. I think it actually came from France, but people had never seen a monkey before, and so they assumed it was some kind of enemy. So they immediately set up a court trial for it, and of course the monkey couldn't speak, so they found it guilty of being a spy, and then they killed it. Isn't that sad? 200 years ago that happened, the monkey of Hartlepool, and it's a very famous story here. And as I was mentioning when I was doing my podcast about the Great Fire of London, the human mind can be a very strange thing, can't it? In terms of how it sometimes sees things that it doesn't understand as being bad. So yeah, 200 years ago, the people of this town in England found a monkey on a boat that had just arrived, and rather than seeing it as something good that they could learn from, they just assumed it was a spy because it couldn't speak, and they immediately had a court case, and it couldn't defend itself, so they killed it. That's sad. I think it had a shelf life. The witch trials of Salem, remember those? That was when a bunch of men decided that women were all witches and persuaded them to confess. Thankfully, that had a shelf life as well. It didn't last very long, but terrible. Yeah, the darker side of humanity. So everything changes. Absolutely everything. Nothing stays the same. Wasn't that a Carly Simon song? I know nothing stays the same, but if you're willing to play the game, it'll be coming around again. Yes, Carly Simon. That song I think was called Coming Around Again. I love Carly Simon. Didn't she do You're So Vain? That was another song. Anyway, yeah, so songs of shelf lives in terms of how long they remain popular as well. So, yeah, you often hear people here commenting, oh, well, everything has a shelf life, just meaning that everything must come to an end. And yeah, it's a very common expression that in the UK. Another good example is the UK's current view on political correctness. It seems that some of our old traditions have had their shelf life. So, for example, I was out yesterday and I wanted to use a bathroom in a restaurant. and there was a notice. The sign said at the back of the restaurant, toilet, and then there was this notice on there which said, please note that we now have gender neutral toilets. I thought, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I can use them or not? And the notice was overly complicated because, British people, we are a little bit obsessed with toilets. We spend billions every year building public toilets and making sure that everyone has access to toilets. Actually, last year, I think, or the year before, the government passed a law which meant that restaurants, by law, must allow people in only to use the toilets if there's no public convenience nearby. The most bizarre thing, why they would even spend billions talking and thinking about that. But yeah, it's a British thing. So anyway, these days when you go anywhere, you're faced usually with a number of toilets. You have one for disabled, and then you have one for I don't know all the labels they use, but they have loads of different toilets for different people. For example, you have a toilet for men, a toilet for women. Then you have a toilet for trans people, people who are changing their gender. And then you have another one for people who don't identify with gender. And a lot of companies, what they're doing to avoid having all of this is they'll just have one toilet, but they'll mark it gender neutral. So it's like a warning on the door. It says, by the way, this toilet is gender neutral. So if you go inside, you're likely to see people of all genders. I'm not really comfortable with that. So my point is that the old view of gender has had its shelf life, and now we're all supposed to use the same bathroom, or if it's a big company, it might have different bathrooms for different types of people. If you go to a music concert, you'll find loads of bathrooms to choose from, and it's very confusing because you look at each one and you think, which one am I supposed to use? It's these little portable toilets, but they've all got signs on them. This one is for this type of person, this one is for this type of person. And it's a little bit strange. A little bit strange. But yeah, so maybe that will have its shelf life because I don't see that being sustainable for the future. I mean, you can't have an office block and then have one floor completely dedicated with toilets. It seems a bit strange. But yeah, gender neutral toilets where you could walk in and find anyone there, that might be a little bit better, but I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that. In fact, the other day, I thought to myself, well, maybe it's safer just to use the disabled toilets. But even though I'm not disabled, maybe that would be a way of avoiding this whole issue of deciding which toilet I want to use, because it takes too long to stand at the toilet door and read the notice about who might be inside. I mean, it's a bit crazy. So I have one of these keys, they call them radar keys, which allows you access to disabled toilets. You can buy them on Amazon or eBay. And here, if someone is disabled, you're not allowed to question that. You can't say, excuse me, you just used that disabled bathroom. Are you really disabled? So we're not allowed to question that. So if you have or if you get one of these radar keys, you can just nip into any disabled bathroom and use that. And that might be a better way of avoiding this embarrassing moment where you have to, read the notice at the toilet door or work out which bathroom you're supposed to use. It seems that old bathrooms with a clear definition of male and female, they've had their shelf life. That's it from me. Hope you've enjoyed this. Catch you soon. Bye.